So let us now let us actually create the functionality of this static function that we defined. Now, because our class is mostly about posts in a blog, which means that we can create a class type, or we can create a parameter that will take class names or string class names, and it will pass those class names inside the class attribute of an HTML list tag. Now, let us actually create a parameter that we will call as class name. And if for some reason we forget to assign an argument to our parameter class name, if we actually forget to provide any sort of arguments, we can fall back to our default value. So let's actually create one default value, and let's call this as maybe post type, and let us now create a check. So because usually if you have worked with maybe if you have worked with HTML, then you would have seen that class names are a class is an attribute, and it takes a sort of string value, and we need to actually pass a string value, and we got to test whether the class name that we're going to take inside our static method, the name that we're going to pass inside it, needs to be a string. So we first need to perform a test or a check to see whether that parameter or the argument that is passed inside this container static method is actually a string. If it's not a string, then we wouldn't set that we wouldn't set the passed argument as the name of the class that we will be creating. So let's actually look into the example. And to create the check, I hope you understand what this conditional does, what this if conditional especially does in programming languages. So I'm going to use the is string built-in function from PHP. So this is string built-in function from PHP will tell me whether the passed-in class name is actually a string. It only renders out a boolean value. So we can pass in the class name parameter, and we are ready to go. So we will be returning HTML inside our method. So in here, I guess it's a mistake. I need to pass along the li inside the unordered list. So I'm going to create an unordered list that will produce. Initially, I'm not going to produce, or I'm not going to use a for loop or any sort of loop. I'm just going to show you how this thing is going to work with a single list, with a single item inside our unordered list. So I'm going to pass in the parameter. So this will be so I've assigned the parameter to the class attribute of the list tag. So whenever we try to pass in any argument to this static method of container, that method will first check whether the class name the argument that we have passed for the class name parameter is actually a string. If it's a string, if this renders out to be true, or if this isString function tells us that this is true or this class name is a string, then it will start to execute this part of the return statement. So this return statement will actually return an unordered list, which will only for now hold a single list item. Inside the single list item, we are going to use the class attribute for our CSS styling. This would help us to style our CSS. This would help us to actually style our DOM elements using cascading style sheets. So we're going to assign that class name that we pass into this static method to our attribute class inside the list tag, and then let's actually provide all this closing list tag. And because we wouldn't actually see any sort of changes or any sort of, if we are providing this class name to this attribute, then this would get stored behind the scenes as a DOM element and as a DOM attribute. But if we really want to see the change, let's actually pass in, let's actually concatenate this class name, and then we can provide the closing list tag along with the closing unordered list tag. So our code is complete, and now because we have reached, or we have took the second path, we have actually arrived at the second part of statically declaring and statically creating a method, statically creating a method and using it as an object. Then we need to use this scope resolution operator instead of the object operator which we used when we used the first approach of instantiation. Now we are not going to use this instantiation, and because we have used the static keyword, we are now going to use the scope resolution operator to print out our value. So again, let me use this printf function, but we're not going to create another variable. We're directly going to reference the class, and hence you see when I referenced or when I invoke the class inside my printf function, it is then followed automatically by two colons, a single pair of colons. So this single pair of colons is actually known as the scope resolution operator. And whenever you provide this two colons, or whenever you provide this with your class name, you're going to see all the static methods, all the static properties inside that class. So we have only one single static method that we named as container. So this static method is going to hold an argument that is going to be used inside the parameter that we named as class name. So let us now use this static method, and inside the static method we're not going to pass anything for now. So we can actually look at the if we do not pass anything for now, we can actually look at the default behavior, but later on we'll look at how to use our custom naming for this static method that we named as container. Now let us end this statement and let us save this, and back to our browser we can refresh this page, and we'll see this printing this web page. The post.php script is actually printing out all the values successfully. The first thing that we have is we're telling the printf function to retrieve the posts a property from the object first post and print that on our browser. So it's actually doing that. In the first statement in line 13, what we have done is we have actually passed along the blog post string to our construct method. So this construct method then takes that name and assigns it to the post property that's in the global scope inside the class post output, and then we are telling the printf function to print this on our browser, which it has done successfully. And the next thing that we are doing is we are telling the printf function to use the static method of container. Now, because it is a static method, we are not instantiating it. This first part, this entire part of object creation through instantiation is known as the it's actually this entire part is actually known as the instantiation of the object. Now in here, when we have declared this function name with the static keyword, we are not going to use the variable approach in our method invocation. This is the reason. This is actually a straightforward approach. You are directly using the class name and you are accessing the method with the static keyword through your scope resolution operator. So this is actually a sort of a relative preference, because many of the frameworks heavily use this scope resolution operator, but many also use this first approach of instantiation. So it's up to you which one you are more comfortable with, but you shouldn't you should use a more of like a conventional approach. So if you have started developing your application using this first approach or this first methodology, then you should stick to it. Otherwise you'd get confused along the